On my 68th birthday, my daughter sent me a text message that said, "Please stop showing up unannounced. It's disruptive." That was it. No happy birthday, no love you. Just that I stared at it for 10 minutes, blinking slowly, like maybe the words would shapeshift into something softer if I waited long enough. I was parked outside her house at the time, clutching a homemade rhubarb pie wrapped in foil. It was still warm. I'd grown the rhubarb myself, the last few stalks from the garden she used to help me weed when she was 8. I'm Elaine Turner, 68, and that was the moment I knew my place in her life had quietly shrunk into something inconvenient, something she didn't even feel guilty about anymore. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. I didn't ring the doorbell. I didn't even knock. I just reversed out of her driveway as slowly as I could, careful not to crush the chalk drawings her son, my grandson, had left on the concrete. Nana was written in shaky blue letters, inside a heart. That did it. I pulled over 2 blocks later and wept so hard I couldn't see the steering wheel. You know, people don't always cut you out in a clean, cinematic way. It's not always a slam door or a courtroom scene. Sometimes it's 1,000 subtle closures, the kind you don't even realize are happening until you're locked out completely. My daughter, Hannah, used to be my world. I had her at 24, fresh out of a marriage that had already begun to unravel. I raised her in a little house off Cherry Street in Milwaukee, beige siding, porch swing, wind chimes from my sister. I worked double shifts at the nursing home just to keep things afloat. Some nights I'd get home so tired I'd forget my own name, but I never forgot hers. Never missed a school project. Never once let her go to bed wondering if she mattered. When she moved out at 19 to live with a boy named Julian, I told her to take the good towels. I told her I'd help with rent if things got tight. I even helped her pack, folding her t-shirts like I was tucking away pieces of myself. That's what being a mother is. I think a lifelong exercise in folding yourself smaller and smaller until all that's left is the shape of your giving. I didn't expect thanks. I never did. But I also didn't expect to become unwelcome. The first time I noticed something change was Christmas, after she had her first child. I showed up early with gifts, handmade, meaningful things. A crocheted blanket in pale yellow, a scrapbook of her baby pictures, even a copy of Goodnight Moon I had saved since she was 3. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She kept glancing at Julian, as if waiting for him to sigh. It was small, it was nothing, but I felt it. And then came the cancellations, the reschedules, the maybe another time, mom text messages that always landed like snow on my chest, soft, cold, quiet, and cumulative. Still, I showed up. I kept showing up. Birthdays, recitals, even when no one invited me. I brought cookies and kindness and that stubborn, aching love that mothers carry like scar tissue. I sat in the back when they forgot to save me a seat. I clapped when they forgot to say I was there. But this birthday was my 68th line. I hadn't told her I was coming. I know that, but I also knew she'd never told me I couldn't, at least, not before. And something in me, some old dignity I thought I'd long buried under casseroles and babysitting offers, stirred awake. That little girl who used to cry when I left her at preschool had vanished, and in her place stood a woman who saw me as EXCESS. I drove home and put the pie in the fridge, didn't even taste it. That night, I looked at the framed picture by my bedside, the one of Hannah holding her newborn, her forehead pressed against mine, and I turned it face down. I didn't cry again after that, not because it didn't hurt, but because I think I finally understood she had let go of me long ago. I'd just never stopped holding on, and maybe it was time I did. The silence after that day didn't arrive all at once. It settled slowly, like dust in a room no one enters anymore. I remember waking up the morning after my birthday and sitting at the edge of the bed, my hands resting on my knees. The house was too quiet, no phone calls, no voicemail full of overlapping grandchild laughter, just the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the old wall clock I'd had since 1982. My knees cracked as I stood, and I thought, this is the sound of being unneeded. But I didn't get angry. I cleaned the kitchen, I folded laundry, I opened the windows to let in the spring air. Life doesn't stop when the people you gave your life to decide you're no longer required. It's strange, isn't it, how the memories we bury become louder when we're alone. That week, they rose like steam from a kettle. I thought about the lunches I packed with thousands of them, how I'd cut her sandwiches into hearts or stars, depending on what she was feeling that week. I remembered those years when money was tight, and I told her I liked instant coffee better anyway so she could take the last of the milk for her cereal. I remembered driving across town in a blizzard because she'd forgotten her permission slip. I arrived at the school soaked through, my fingers red with cold. She'd barely looked up from her locker when I handed it to her. But I remember thinking, good, she doesn't feel the panic I do. Then there were the hospital visits, the small, constant sacrifices. She had a bout of appendicitis, and I spent 3 nights in a stiff plastic chair beside her bed, wiping her forehead and arguing gently with the nurses when they took too long. I remember thinking, let her rest, I'll stay awake. I worked long hours, and I mean long, 12-hour shifts at Oak Hollow Nursing Center, lifting and turning bodies heavier than mine, always with a soft voice and a steady hand. I'd come home and still cook her dinner pasta with mushrooms, just how she liked it, even when my back ached so bad I had to sit down between stirring. I never remarried. There were offers, I won't lie, men who saw the steadiness in me, the way I could make a home feel safe. But I said no, every time. My answer was always the same. My daughter needs me. And I believed that was enough. Do you know what it's like to give up your life so someone else can find theirs? It doesn't feel like sacrifice at first. It feels like love. It feels like purpose. You don't even realize what you're giving up until you're older, and the house is quiet, and no one calls you mom unless they need something notarized or dropped off. When she became a mother, I thought something would soften between us again, that shared knowledge, the ache and awe of motherhood. But instead, she grew distant. Perhaps she thought I'd judge her. Or maybe my presence reminded her of her own unmet expectations. Still, I stayed. I helped. I held the baby while she napped. I cleaned the kitchen without being asked. I always asked before holding the baby, even though I wanted nothing more than to scoop him up and whisper lullabies from a time she'd long forgotten. I never told her how often I wept on the drive home, my hands trembling on the wheel, because her thanks always felt like an obligation. I didn't want praise, I just didn't want to feel like a burden. One summer, I helped them move into their new home. I painted the nursery, pale green, soft and sweet. Julian nodded his approval, and Hannah smiled slightly when I added stars to the ceiling. I stayed until midnight scrubbing the baseboards while they ordered takeout and scrolled through their phones. When I left that night, no one said thank you. But I smiled in the dark anyway, because the stars on the ceiling glowed, and I thought, maybe, one day, the baby would ask who put them there. I kept track of every birthday, every milestone. I sent cards even when I knew they'd end up in the trash, wrote notes inside them in cursive, careful not to sound too sentimental, always signed, with love, Mom. Not love you, just with love. A small, quiet difference. And when Julian lost his job for a time, I mailed them grocery store gift cards, anonymous ones, just so they wouldn't feel embarrassed. She never brought it up. Never thanked me, but I saw her post pictures of grilled salmon and fresh produce online during that time, and I felt a strange comfort. It wasn't just her. My sacrifices stretched across years like a stitched quilt, holding the hand of my own mother in hospice so my daughter wouldn't have to see her that way, selling the family car to help cover Hannah's student loans, giving up trips, hobbies, new clothes, all so she could have a sense of security. Even if I was barely holding my own, I didn't mind. I truly didn't. That's the part people don't understand. I didn't give out of duty. I gave because I wanted her life to feel soft where mine had been coarse. But now, looking back, I see something else. I gave her everything I had, and then a little more. And what I kept for myself was almost nothing at all. You don't realize the weight of your own generosity until you stop giving it. That's what I learned after my birthday when the text message, short and sharp, echoed in my ears for days. It's disruptive, she'd said, as if my presence was a storm, as if my love was something to be managed, not received. I wish I could say I stopped hoping after that, but I didn't. I still checked my phone every morning that week, expecting, praying for a second message, an apology, a clarification, even just a single word. Sorry. It never came. And the pie, I took it out of the fridge after 4 days. The crust had gone soggy. I cut a slice, took one bite, and threw the rest away. It tasted like silence, so I started cleaning the attic instead. Not just dusting, really cleaning. sorting through boxes, opening old albums, touching remnants of a life I had almost forgotten I'd lived. And that's when I found it. A box I hadn't opened in years. Inside, there were letters, receipts, a notarized paper I didn't remember signing. It would be months before I understood what it all meant. But standing there, with the light slanting in from the dusty window, I felt the first flicker of a truth I hadn't let myself believe. I had been erased, not loudly, not cruelly, just quietly, efficiently, and soon I would learn just how far that erasure had gone. But I said nothing. Not yet, not then. There's a peculiar kind of grief that doesn't come with funerals or flowers or casseroles left on your porch. It's the kind that accumulates, grain by grain, until one day you're ankle deep and realize you've been walking through sand your whole life and no one ever asked if you were tired. After I found the box in the attic, I didn't rush to conclusions. That's never been my way. I just stood there, fingers resting on the edge, staring at the faded manila folders and curled corners of old papers. Something about the way they were arranged felt too neat, too intentional. But I told myself it could wait. So instead, I went back to my days. I kept moving, but once you notice a fracture in the wall, you begin to see every crack. It began, as these things do, not with cruelty but with absence. Subtle choices that pass unnoticed by those making them but not by the one being left out. There was the Easter brunch the year before, when Hannah said it would just be too many people for me to join. I remember buying a new blouse anyway, just in case she changed her mind. Pale lilac with soft buttons. I hung it on the back of my chair and waited until noon. She never called. I folded it and placed it back in the drawer without wearing it. Then, there was the time her youngest was in the school play. "Oh, it's nothing big," she'd said when I asked. "Just a classroom thing." I found out later, through a friend whose grandson was in the same grade, that it had been a full school production. Parents were invited, grandparents too. Still, I said nothing, even when my birthday was forgotten the year before last entirely. Not just late, I convinced myself it was an oversight. People are busy, calendars slip. But later I saw the photos on Hannah's page, balloons, a barbecue. My grandson held up a sign that read, "Happy birthday, Nana," only it wasn't for me. It was for Julian's mother. I stared at that photo for a long time, her arms wrapped around him, her face glowing with a kind of warmth I used to imagine was reserved for me. But it wasn't just the events. It was the tone, the shifting undercurrent. When I'd offered to help, it became a burden. When I brought meals, they were labeled too salty or a little much. My grandson once said, innocently, that Daddy says Nana's house smells like old people. He was 5. I smiled. Children repeat what they hear. And phone calls, while they stopped being conversations and became transactions. Quick check-ins about school pickup or prescription drop-offs. No room for stories. No time for memory. She started texting instead of calling, then stopped replying altogether some weeks. If I didn't initiate, I wouldn't hear from her at all. A week would pass. Then 2. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and forget why I went there. I'd just stand there, surrounded by the quiet, thinking of all the things I hadn't said, the moments I swallowed to keep the peace, the way I'd learned to fold my feelings small so they wouldn't get in the way of her life. It's a strange thing to feel unwanted in the life you built, like being a guest in your own house, one you paid for, cleaned, kept warm through hard winters. There was a Sunday, sometime in August, when I stopped by with a tin of lemon shortbread cookies. I'd made them with the same recipe my mother used, the one Hannah always begged for at Christmas. She opened the door halfway, said they were in the middle of something. I could see Julian watching television in the background. The baby was playing on the rug. Nothing urgent, nothing uninterruptible. Still, she didn't invite me in. I left the tin on the step and walked back to my car. Drove the long way home. Past the park where I used to push her on the swings. I sat there in the parking lot for nearly an hour, watching other families, other mothers and daughters, laughing in the sun. I'd always told myself that love was enough, that if I loved hard enough, gave long enough, waited patiently enough, she'd come back to me. But love isn't a currency. It doesn't guarantee a return. It's more like planting seeds in someone else's garden and watching them pull the blooms before you can even see them open. 100 quiet hurts. That's what it was. Not one great wound, but many little ones. Each forgetful glance, each closed door, each event I wasn't told about, each decision made without my name in the room. It was during the holidays, in the way she called when she needed something, but never just to hear my voice. In the Christmas cards signed from the Thompsons instead of Hannah, Julian, and the kids, as if my name had been erased by marriage, by distance, by time. Even my health began to fade in unnoticed ways. A low-grade fatigue, a tightness in my chest that came and went. I told her once not to worry her, just to share. She said, "You should probably see someone," and that was it. No follow-up, no visit. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been easier if she'd shouted, if there had been a scene something sharp and undeniable. But there was no explosion, just silence. A steady retreat. I was grieving a person who was still alive, grieving a relationship that had rotted quietly from the inside out. But I wasn't ready to walk away, not yet. Not until I found out what they'd done. Not until the line I'd spent a lifetime avoiding was crossed cleanly, coldly, and without hesitation. That day would come, sooner than I thought, and when it did, I would no longer be the woman who made excuses for other people's cruelty. I would no longer be the mother who waited. It was a Thursday when I finally opened the folder. I'd been avoiding it for weeks. It sat on my dining room table beneath a stack of old mail, as if paper could shield me from its weight. Every morning I moved it aside to place my tea down, and every evening I promised myself, tomorrow, but something inside me knew. It wasn't just nostalgia in that box from the attic. There was something else, something that needed reckoning. That day, I made myself a cup of black tea, sat in my robe, and opened it. The first few pages were what I expected. Utility bills from the old house, copies of Hannah's birth certificate, and school records. Things I had saved without realizing how long I'd kept them. But toward the bottom, folded neatly inside a labeled envelope, I found it. My signature. Twice. On a document I had no memory of signing. At first, I thought maybe it was from long ago. Maybe I'd forgotten. But the date was less than 9 months ago. The title read, Durable Power of Attorney. I stared at it for a long time. The print blurred slightly. My heart thudded in that way, when your body knows something before your mind is ready to accept it. It listed my daughter as my designated agent, all authority, financial, legal, and medical transferred to her. And below that, my signature, clean, controlled, just like I used to sign her school notes, but I hadn't written it. I know my own hand. I know what it looks like when I've signed something tired, or distracted, or under stress. This wasn't it. Someone had traced me, or worse, someone had copied me. And in that moment, a strange coldness washed over me. Not rage, not even betrayal, just clarity. I flipped through the rest of the folder, and the pieces started to fit. There was a notice from my bank about an updated beneficiary. There was a letter from the county office regarding property taxes not on my home, but on Hannah's, paid with an account that bore my name. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window. The oak tree outside swayed gently in the breeze. The world, it seemed, had no idea what I had just discovered. No dramatic music, no lightning strikes. Just a woman standing in her kitchen robe, realizing the final thread holding her to her child had already been quietly cut. When did she do it? Did she sit at my dining table with those papers, asking me to sign something else entirely? Did she wait until I was napping on the couch and slid a pen into my hand? Or had it been more deliberate, more distant, a forged signature, a notary who didn't look too closely? I didn't know, and I still don't. But what I did know, deep in my chest, was that the person I had protected with my life had used my trust like a passcode. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would I tell? Most of my friends were gone, moved to warmer states, or moved on in other ways. I had one neighbor, Cheryl, who brought me soup once a week and left it on the porch. But we weren't close enough for confidences like this. Besides, saying it aloud would make it real. I walked around the house for hours that afternoon, my hand resting on furniture I'd paid for in full, memories humming in the walls like trapped bees. I looked at the photo albums, the ones I'd planned to give to Hannah someday. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my nightstand at the drawer where I kept the small velvet box that held my wedding band and the bracelet my mother gave me before she passed. How long had this been happening? How long had I been smiling, in her kitchen, rocking her babies, while she maneuvered behind my back to take control of my life? There was no yelling, no tears. I didn't confront her. That would have been too loud, too final. I needed to understand what else had been taken from me before I let her know I'd seen it. So I did what I've always done. I got quiet. But this time, it wasn't the quiet of a mother making room for her daughter's life. It was the quiet of a woman preparing for her own. I started pulling bank statements, calling old contacts, checking accounts I hadn't looked at in years. I found small transfers, spaced out just enough to not be obvious, a missing refund check, a closed savings account I hadn't touched since 2009, and I remembered the time I'd lost my debit card just for a few days. She had offered to help. Cancel it. You shouldn't have to stress about these things, she'd said. I remember being grateful. Help me. I was grateful. I thought about every time she said, let me handle it, Mom. It's easier that way. I thought about the times she asked me to sign just a quick form before dinner. I thought about how, when I once asked about updating my will, she smiled and said, don't worry about that stuff. We'll take care of you. Take care of me. I sat on the floor of my bedroom and pressed my palms against the carpet. I'd vacuumed that morning. Everything was clean, in place. But nothing felt safe anymore. Not even my home. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. Not exactly, but something had shifted. This wasn't about hurt feelings or forgotten holidays anymore. This was legal, intentional, calculated. This wasn't about being overlooked. This was about being erased. And that was the line. I had spent a lifetime bending to avoid breaking, swallowing instead of speaking, waiting instead of asking. But now, for the first time, I felt the fire rise in me. Quiet, steady, not burning yet, but hot enough to melt old habits. I didn't confront her that week. I didn't storm her house, or call her crying. I started making lists, quietly, deliberately. I called a lawyer. I opened a new account. I ordered a safe deposit box. I didn't tell her. She didn't notice, and maybe that was the most telling part of all. The final line had been crossed, and I was stepping off the map. Silence, when chosen deliberately, has a strange kind of power. Not the silence of being ignored, or left out, or forgotten. I had lived in that kind of silence for years. No, this was different. This was the silence of decision, the silence of someone who has finally seen the truth and no longer feels the need to explain herself to those who already decided not to listen. After I found the documents and traced the signatures that weren't mine, I stopped speaking unnecessarily, not to punish, not to test, but because something deep inside me had shifted. A chord had snapped quietly, and in its place, a new stillness settled in. I didn't call Hannah. I didn't ask her why. I didn't give her the chance to lie to my face. Instead, I withdrew gently. With intention, I began with small things. I stopped checking my phone in the mornings. I used to look for her name the moment I woke up, hoping for a message, a photo of the kids, a casual hello. Now I let the screen stay dark. I left the charger unplugged. The house felt different in this new silence. It was no longer a waiting room, no longer a shrine to her potential visits. I moved things around, not out of anger, but to reclaim space. I packed up the toys she used to bring for the boys. I folded the baby blankets and placed them in a box marked storage. I left it in the attic, next to the folder that had opened my eyes. For the first time in years, I looked at my home and saw myself in it. I cleared the entryway of extra shoes, took down the coat hooks meant for guests who no longer came. I rearranged the pantry, replacing fruit snacks and juice boxes with teas I actually liked. I bought a lemon verbena blend that made the whole kitchen smell like quiet mornings. Then I started to read again. Not just skim news or half focus on TV shows while cooking. I took down books I hadn't touched in a decade. Stories I loved. Before motherhood rewired my brain into always planning, always anticipating. I read slowly, pen in hand, underlining phrases that echoed something buried inside me. One line from a collection of essays struck me so hard I whispered it aloud. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I sat with that for a long time. My days became simpler, softer. I began to cook for one, without apology. I set the table for myself with a cloth napkin, real dishes, and flowers from the backyard in a chipped vase. I listened to music that didn't try too hard, instrumentals, piano pieces. I let them fill the rooms where once I waited for laughter that never came. My silence wasn't just external, it was internal, too. The voice in my head, the one that used to ask, what did I do wrong, became quieter. I stopped blaming myself for loving her the best way I knew how. Some afternoons, I would sit by the window with a cup of that lemon verbena tea, staring out at the garden, watching the seasons turn in small, imperceptible shifts. And I realized how much of life happens that way, in shifts you don't notice until you look back and see how far you've drifted. I thought about all the birthdays, the holidays, the school plays. I thought about the way she used to grab my hand as a little girl, tugging me toward the playground, her laughter full and free. I mourned that version of her, not out of bitterness, but as one mourns a beloved character in a book whose story took a turn you didn't expect. I started writing things down. Not letters, just thoughts, observations, memories. I filled 3 notebooks in 2 months. Pages and pages of quiet recollection. Some days, it felt like I was meeting myself for the first time in decades. And I started saving. That part was practical. I opened a new bank account in a small credit union across town, something modest, just mine. I had my pension, a bit of savings, some things tucked away over the years. I canceled the joint emergency card she insisted I keep just in case. I didn't tell her. She never noticed. I found a lawyer through a friend from church, a gentle man, maybe in his 40s, who met with me twice before even charging me. I brought in the documents. I told him what I suspected. I showed him the forged signature. He nodded slowly and said, "You're not the first." He didn't say much more, and I appreciated that we began the process carefully, quietly. He guided me through rescinding the power of attorney, setting legal boundaries, establishing a trust, things I should have done long ago, perhaps. But when you love someone deeply, you don't prepare for betrayal. You prepare for birthdays, for babysitting, for making their lives easier, not for this. And I learned. I read everything he gave me, asked questions, took notes. I realized how easily trust can be weaponized when wrapped in familial language. How many women like me are left out of the very decisions that shaped the final chapters of our lives. But more than that, I learned about myself, that I could still protect what was mine, that I didn't need anyone's permission to exist fully. That silence, when chosen, could be a sanctuary. I didn't stop loving Hannah. I want to make that clear. The love didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It went from a living thing breathing, and warm and needy, to something folded neatly in a box, tucked on a shelf. A relic of who we were, not who we are. I saw her once during those months, at the grocery store. She didn't see me. She was in the self-checkout, typing quickly, looking irritated. Her youngest was tugging at her sleeve, asking for gum. I watched her from behind the magazine stand, unseen. It hit me then how much of her life I no longer knew, and how much of mine she never bothered to ask about. I went home that day and sat in my garden until the sun went down. And I didn't cry. I just let the silence do what it does best. It held me, it told me the truth. It asked nothing in return. And in that stillness, something began to bloom. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something very close. It's strange how little the world changes when your whole life quietly rearranges itself. The mail still comes at 10 each morning. The neighbor still walks her dog past my porch. The sky still stains itself in honey and blue around 6:45. Nothing looks different from the outside, but inside, I am moving differently now. Subtly, intentionally. Like someone who'd finally stopped circling the same locked door and started walking toward the sun. I began with the practical things, the kinds of things I used to put off because I was too busy helping everyone else. I updated my will, created a living trust, transferred the house title to myself alone. It took several meetings and a great deal of reading, but I understood it, every signature, every clause. The lawyer, Thomas, never pushed. He explained everything with the patience of someone who'd seen too many women like me, too trusting, too quiet, too erased. I appreciated that. He never once asked me if I was sure. He let me be sure on my own. Once that was done, I changed the locks. I didn't make a big thing of it. Just called a man from down the street who worked with a locksmith company, told him the old keys didn't work anymore. He came by the same afternoon and replaced them all. Asked if I wanted a spare left under the mat. I said no. That night, for the first time in years, I slept with my door locked and my spirit unlocked. Something had shifted in me. Not bitterness, not revenge, just clarity. I canceled the life insurance policy Hannah had listed herself on, opened a new one with my niece Rachel as the beneficiary. Rachel, bless her heart, had sent me a card every month since I turned 60. No reason, just handwritten notes with her crooked handwriting and too many stickers. Thinking of you, she always said. She never asked for anything. Just stayed kind. I didn't explain the changes to Hannah. Didn't feel the need. My silence had become its own language now, one I had finally become fluent in. It spoke for me. It guarded me. One Saturday, I woke up early and drove out to the farmer's market by Lake Geneva. I hadn't done that in years. The drive took almost 2 hours, and for most of it I kept the windows down, letting the morning air braid through my hair. I bought myself sunflowers, a small lemon tart, and a jar of local honey I didn't need but liked the look of. I sat by the lake afterward, with my shoes off, my bare feet in the cool grass, and I wrote in my notebook. I didn't write about Hannah. I wrote about the smell of peaches, the sound of children playing nearby. A poem that came to me halfway through my second cup of coffee. I felt present, not waiting for the next call, not bracing for disappointment, just here. And when I drove home, I didn't feel lonely. I felt spacious. I began taking long walks every morning, not for exercise, but for peace. I learned the names of the birds nesting near the creek, the red-winged blackbird, the cedar waxwing. I downloaded an app that helped me identify them by sound. Some mornings I'd hear a warbler and smile like I'd seen an old friend. I started saying no to things, gently, but firmly. Cheryl, my neighbor, asked if I'd bake cookies for the church potluck. I told her not this time. She smiled, surprised, but didn't press. I used to say yes to everything. Now, I saved my eyes for myself. I found an old sewing machine in the basement and spent 2 weeks fixing it. The motor whirred, like an old friend. Waking up, I began sewing again. I made myself a new table runner, repaired the hems of 2 dresses I hadn't worn in years. It felt like picking up a thread I'd dropped somewhere back in my 30s. And I made space in my life for people who saw me. There was a woman at the library, Esther, her name was, who always commented on the books I checked out. One day, she mentioned a book club. Just 6 of us, she said. Nothing fancy, you should come. I hesitated, but I went. That first evening, I sat in a room full of women, older and quieter than me, sipping tea and talking about fiction like it mattered, and it did. The stories mattered, the gathering mattered, and they didn't ask what I did for a living. They didn't ask about my children. They just asked what I thought. And I answered, with my own voice, not as someone's mother or helper or background fixture, but as Elaine. We met again the next month, and the next. Slowly, I made a place for myself there. I moved differently in other ways too, not just out in the world, but inside my mind. I stopped justifying the past, stopped defending her to myself. She was stressed. She didn't mean it. She was trying her best. No, I had spent enough years cushioning her choices with my silence. I no longer needed to explain away what hurt me. The truth didn't require embellishment. What happened, happened, and it changed me not into someone angry, but someone is awake. I looked at myself in the mirror differently now, not critically, not through the lens of someone else's disappointment, just plainly, kindly. I was aging, yes. My hands were thinner, the lines deeper around my mouth, but my eyes were clear, and I liked them. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies, not for closure. I was living, and in that new life, I was learning to carry joy like a candle, carefully, gratefully, but no longer hiding it behind my back. One evening in late fall, I lit a fire in the hearth for the first time in years, sat beside it with a quilt over my legs and the dog-eared book club novel in my hands, and I thought, not with regret, but with resolve. They do not know what they gave away, but I do. And I will never forget again. I didn't disappear overnight. No, it was quieter than that, like fog rolling back from a field. One morning you look up and realize the shapes you took for granted are no longer there. I had always believed my presence in their lives was a given, that even if it went unnoticed, it was still necessary. But now, as I pulled away gently, watched the effects of my absence unfold like ripples on a still pond. They didn't notice right away. That's the part that stung at first. Weeks passed with no calls, no questions. It was as if they'd been waiting for me to disappear all along. I had given so much of myself, time, energy, money, care, that I believed there would be a sudden vacuum when I stopped. But people don't miss the things they assume will always be there. Not immediately, but slowly, the cracks began to show. It started with the mail. One morning, a thick envelope arrived, addressed to me, but clearly meant for Hannah. A bill from the property tax office. She had never changed the mailing address on the home I'd helped her co-sign. I never lived there, but I was still listed. When I had the documents reviewed by Thomas, my lawyer, he confirmed it. They'd removed my name from the title without properly filing the paperwork, illegally, quietly, and now, the county was confused. The taxes weren't paid, notices were being sent, conflicts were building. I hadn't done anything, really just removed my involvement. But without me quietly holding the strings in the background, their careful balancing act began to falter. I didn't say a word. I forwarded the letter back in a plain envelope with no return address. Then came the birthday, not Minimi grandson's. The year before, I'd bought the cake, decorated the house, hand-sewn little felt crowns for the party favors. This time, there were no crowns. A mutual acquaintance from the community center mentioned it in passing. The party was a bit of a mess, wasn't it? Poor Hannah looked overwhelmed. I just nodded, a polite smile in place. I didn't say that I used to arrive at 7 a.m. to help clean and organize, that I handled RSVPs, packed gift bags, and cleaned dishes after the last guest left. I didn't say that her overwhelm had always been buffered by my invisible labor. She knew now, in small ways, maybe, but she knew. I began to hear things, not gossip, exactly just whispers. Feedback through neighbors and old friends who still bumped into them at the store or church. She mentioned how busy things are without you helping out. Julian's mom isn't stepping in the way you used to. They were late again for the school pickup this time. I didn't relish their struggles. I truly didn't, but I couldn't deny the quiet vindication I felt, like some part of the universe was gently confirming what I had always hoped. I mattered more than they had let on. I wasn't just a background figure. I had been the scaffolding, holding their life in place, emotionally, too. Without me, the small kindnesses fell away. I used to send messages reminding her to call her uncle on his birthday. I used to drop off soup when one of them was sick. I used to listen when she needed to vent, when Julian forgot an anniversary or the baby wouldn't sleep. I had been her soft landing. And now, that cushion is gone, and it showed. One Sunday, I received a call from her number. My heart lurched. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear her voice. It wasn't her, it was Julian. He sounded tired, hesitant, just checking in. He said, I waited. Hannah's been going through a lot, he added, his voice low. We thought maybe you could come by sometime. I paused, not out of spite, but from something deeper, something learned. I hope she's all right, I said, and nothing more. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. I was no longer the default fixer, no longer the silent servant in their family play, and that shift in roles was now being felt where it hurt, in the heart of their daily living. I didn't return the call. Instead, I went on with my week. I met the book club on Thursday. We discussed a story about a woman who disappeared from her life and reappeared somewhere new under her own name, on her own terms. It felt too close to say aloud, so I just listened. Later that month, I received a letter, not an email, not a text, a real letter, addressed in Hannah's handwriting. She wrote that she missed me, that she didn't realize how much I did, that she was sorry though. She didn't say for what, exactly. It was a soft, vague kind of regret, the kind that sounds sincere on the surface but avoids the core. I folded it and placed it inside the same notebook where I'd written all my thoughts these past few months. I didn't respond, because something had changed in me. Not just in what I allowed, but in what I required. I no longer wanted to be needed. I wanted to be seen, and they were just beginning to notice what that absence meant. The children, too. My oldest grandson sent me a message through Rachel, a drawing of me and him, holding hands, with I miss Nana scrawled across the top. I cried when I saw it, not out of sadness, but because love like that, pure unfiltered finds its way through. Maybe one day, when he's older, he'll ask why I left. Why did Nana stop showing up? I'll tell him the truth, gently. That love can't live where it's not respected. Sometimes, walking away is the most loving thing a person can do for themselves. In the quiet of my home, I began to grow fuller, not from their absence, but from my own return, to myself, to the woman I had been before she was reduced to a role, and still. I never stopped loving them. But love, I've learned, is not the same as permission. They lost something when I stepped back, and for once, they knew it. I never meant to write the letter. Not at first. It started as a few notes scribbled on the back of a grocery list, then became a paragraph in the margin of a library book receipt. I'd find myself waking in the night with a sentence running through my head, and I'd reach for the pen I now kept on my nightstand. By the end of that week, my quiet thoughts had gathered into something fuller, something aching to be spoken, not to anyone else, but to the version of me who once believed silence was survival. So I sat at the small oak desk in my bedroom, the same one I'd bought from a yard sale in 1991, and refinished with sandpaper and lavender oil, and began to write. The letter was not addressed to Hannah, nor to Julian, nor to any lawyer or friend. It was addressed to the woman I used to be. Elaine. The one who smiled through gritted teeth, who carried soup and second chances in equal measure, who sat at birthday parties like a shadow, unnoticed, who allowed herself to be chipped away one quiet request at a time. The letter started plainly, "You deserved better." I stared at those 3 words for a long time, let them hang in the room like smoke. You deserved better, not perfect, not extravagant, just better, more acknowledgement, more warmth, more of your name is spoken with respect, not just need. You were never a burden, I wrote. You were a backbone. I paused, remembering all the ways I had shrunk myself over the years, how I apologized when I coughed too loud, how I waited outside in the cold because I didn't want to be disruptive, how I asked if it was all right to love them if my presence was too much. I wrote about the pie I brought that day, the warmth of the foil against my lap in the car, the way I sat 2 blocks away, tasting metal in my mouth from swallowing the grief so fast. I wrote about how I pretended not to see her glancing at Julian for approval when I spoke, how I told myself over and over that love was worth enduring discomfort. I wrote about the signature, my own name, stolen from me like a keepsake no one thought I'd miss. I wrote about the sting of realizing that even my identity, my choices, my rights had been treated like something negotiable. You thought love was enough, I wrote, and you weren't wrong. But love without regard, love without honor, is not love. It's useful. It felt like a confession. Or maybe an exhale. I wrote for hours, about the garden, the quiet, the way the light fell in my living room now, uninterrupted by noise or waiting. I wrote about rediscovering my reflection, not as an aging woman, but as a whole one, a woman who no longer confused absence with peace, or sacrifice with worth. I told her how I'd moved differently, how I'd learned to say no, how I'd stitched a life back together with tea, books, early walks, and legal boundaries, how I'd grown again toward anyone, but upward and inward, like a tree finally left unpruned. I wrote about the boy who drew me in crayon. I missed Nana, that unfiltered love that passed over the walls his parents had built. How love, when real, knows how to find you. Then I wrote the line that took the longest to surface. I forgive you for not leaving sooner. That was the hardest, because there had been years when I knew, when the signs were clear, when my spirit dimmed in their presence, when I was already being erased. But I stayed. I gave. I kept believing I could earn my place. It wasn't a weakness, it was love. And now, I know. Loving someone doesn't require disappearing for them. It doesn't require handing over your voice and calling it devotion. It doesn't mean letting yourself dissolve into convenience. I sat back and looked at the pages, 7 in total. My handwriting is steady, slanted slightly right, a bit softer than it was in my 20s, but still recognizably mine. I placed the pages in an envelope and sealed it, wrote nothing on the outside. I didn't intend to send it. It wasn't meant to be received, it was meant to be released. That evening, I walked down to the fire pit in the backyard, the one we rarely used, the one Hannah always said was too much work to light. I stacked the pages like kindling, placed them gently on the embers of old pine needles, and lit a match. The flame caught quickly, curling the paper into soft black ribbons. I sat in a folding chair and watched it burn, not as an act of anger, but of completion. I wasn't burning my past, I was offering it closure. The wind shifted and carried a bit of ash into my lap. I didn't brush it away. I let it sit there, like a final blessing, a quiet mark of what had been carried, and what had now been let go. As the fire dimmed, I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph, not sadness. Just space. Room for something else, not new beginnings. I wasn't chasing youth or repair, just presence. Later, I made myself a bowl of soup, split pea with rosemary, lit a candle on the windowsill. Read the final chapters of the book club novel, then close it slowly. And for the first time in my life, I did not ask myself whether I was enough. I simply was. Whole. Held. Free. These days, my life hums in soft, steady tones. There's no rush in my mornings. I wake before the sun, not because I must, but because I want to. The air is still cool at that hour, and the light outside is the color of quiet promise. I brew my tea slowly, with both hands wrapped around the cup as the kettle hisses and settles. I still drink the lemon verbena blend. It tastes like everything I never knew I needed: warmth, simplicity, peace. My life is quiet now, not empty, not lonely, just quiet, still rich in the way. Lakes are rich, deep and undisturbed. The garden is in bloom again. I planted lavender along the fence, and the bees are drunk with it. My tomato vines lean toward the sun like they remember where they came from. There's a patch of time that's gone wild near the path, and I let it. I like the idea of something thriving without permission. Every morning, I walk the length of the backyard barefoot. It reminds me I'm still hair-rooted, soft with age but not frail. I speak to the plants sometimes, not in words, but in the way I tend them. I suppose it's my way of offering care now, quiet, without expectation. There's no more waiting. That might be the greatest gift this silence has given me. I don't wait for birthdays to be remembered, or for doors to open that long ago closed. I don't wait for the phone to ring. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. When it does, I answer if I want to. If I don't, I let the machine take it. I still keep the letter Hannah sent, the one that came months after my withdrawal, where she said she missed me, where she offered soft words but no real ownership. It's tucked into the same drawer as a photograph of her at age 6, dressed like a sunflower for a school play. I look at it sometimes, both the letter and the photo, and I feel nothing sharp. No anger, just distance, like looking through glass at something long past. She wrote again, once, a few lines. She asked if I wanted to come for Christmas. I didn't reply, not because I don't love her, I always will, but because love, for me now, requires safety and peace, and neither of those lives in the spaces where I am tolerated instead of cherished. I've learned that boundaries are not walls, they're doors, and some doors are meant to remain closed. Instead, I spent Christmas that year with Esther from the book club and her sister, Ruth. We drank spiced cider and watched an old movie with the sound too low. It was lovely, uneventful, perfect. We shared stories, the kind you tell when you know no one is waiting to interrupt you. I told them about my garden. They told me about a cousin who knits blankets for animal shelters. We laughed more than I expected to. After dinner, I went home, lit a candle, and sat in my living room with the fire crackling beside me. The silence was full, not hollow. I think often now about legacy, not the kind people chase, not houses or heirlooms or bank accounts, but the kind that lingers in memory, in spirit. Mine, I've decided, will be made of softness, of presence, of the quiet courage it takes to walk away with grace. There's a neighbor, girl Carol Inches, maybe 12. She waves at me when I'm out front watering the roses. Sometimes she asks questions about the flowers. I answer patiently. She likes to know things. One day, I gave her a cutting from my hydrangea bush and showed her how to root it in a jar. Her eyes lit up like I'd handed her treasure. That moment, her wonder, her small thank you meant more than 1,000 forced invitations. It reminded me that giving, when received with respect, is holy, not a transaction, a gift. I will write more now, not for anyone but myself. Some poems, some letters I'll never send, reflections mostly. I've filled 3 notebooks since last year. I'm working on a 4th. I keep them on a shelf by the window where the light falls just right in the afternoon. Sometimes I imagine someone finding them long after I'm gone, reading my words, my truths, and understanding that this womanquiat, unseen by mental, lived a full life, one that mattered. I no longer keep the framed photo by my bed, the one of Hannah and I in the hospital after her first son was born. I placed it gently in a box with other keepsakes and slid it into the back of my closet. Not to forget, but to release. Now, by my bedside, there's a photo of my garden at sunrise, taken just last week. The light caught on the edge of the rosemary bush like gold thread. That's what I want to fall asleep looking at. Not what was, but what is. Peace. I kept busy, but never rushed. I make soup once a week, even when there's no one to share it with. I journal before bed. I watch the seasons change through my kitchen window like it's the most sacred show on earth. And sometimes, just sometimes, I whisper a thank you to the girl I was, the one who stayed too long, the one who gave too much, the one who finally stood up without raising her voice. Thank you for surviving. I tell her, thank you for leaving. Thank you for returning to yourself. My life is quiet now. And that's enough. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty, and that was beautiful.